Hey everyone, in the last episode you learned that everything in Unity is made of game objects, and components are what give those game objects power. But here's the real question, how do those components talk to each other? That's what we're diving into today. By the end of this video, you'll know how to connect your components to other components and game objects. And that's the real key to building gameplay in Unity. All right, let's get started. Let's start with components on the same game object. First, I'm going to add a cube. So I'll right-click in the hierarchy, select 3D object, and select cube. I'll call this player. Then I'll right-click again. I'll go to 3D object, and I'll select plane. I'm going to call this ground. Now I'll move the player up 1 unit, so it's just above the ground. On the player, I want to add a component. So with player selected in the hierarchy, click on Add Component in the inspector window. Type rigid body. Select the one that doesn't say 2D. This enables physics on our box. Next, I want to add a new script. Right-click on Assets, go to Create, select Folder, and type Scripts. Now right-click on the Scripts folder, go to Create, select Mono Behavior Script. Call this Player Controller. Select your player and then drag the player controller onto the inspector window. This adds your player controller component to the player game object. Now we need a way to reference our rigid body so we can affect the rigid body during gameplay. Let's open our player controller by double-clicking on it. In order to affect our rigid body, we need a reference to the rigid body. We need to store that so that we can use it in our player controller class. So let's create a variable. Here we've defined a private rigid body variable called RB. RB is the name of the variable and it's my acronym for rigid body. You can name it whatever you want. Rigid body is the data type and private is the accessibility. Specifying private makes sure it can't be accessed outside this class. Okay, so now let's get a reference to our rigid body and store it in the rigid body variable. Here we assign RB equal to GetComponent rigid body type. GetComponent is a special method that Unity provides. It searches through the component list of a game object and finds a component that matches the data type you specify. If it's found, it will store a reference to that component in the variable you're pointing to. Okay, let's do something with this rigid body. Here we use a conditional. If keyboard.current.space-key is pressed, which just checks to see if the space bar on your keyboard is pressed using the Unity input system. This is the new system. Then it does a call to the rigid body, which we have a reference to in the RB variable called add force. This will add upward force using this vector3 up and multiply it by 1.5 times. And the force mode is impulse. This will apply upward force to our box. Let's save this and see it in Unity. In Unity, press play. Our box falls to the ground using physics, which has gravity. Press the spacebar, our box shoots up in the air, applying an upward force to the rigid body, and then falls to the ground again using physics. This is one way your script can talk to components living on the same game object. Okay, what if I want this cube to affect another game object? Let's add a sphere. Right-click in the hierarchy, go to 3D object, and select sphere. We'll call this bubble. Let's move our sphere somewhere so it's visible and not intersecting with the ground. Let's make a serialized field in our script and then drag and drop the reference in the inspector. Double-click on your player controller script. We'll add a new reference at the top. Here we have the serialized field attribute. This exposes a private variable in the inspector. Then we define this variable as private and it stores a game object in the variable called bubble. Let's write some code to affect this game object. This line is a conditional that says if bubble is not equal to null, which means if bubble is not empty, then we can do everything inside the if statement. Otherwise, it will jump over this code and continue. Then inside we have another conditional. It says if keyboard current S key is pressed. So if the S key is currently pressed, then we will take the bubble, we'll access its transform component, and we'll access the local scale of its transform component. And we'll multiply that by 1.005f, meaning float. Save this and go back to Unity. Okay, select your player in the hierarchy window, then drag the bubble into the newly exposed input field. Remember, we check to see if this input field is null or not, or empty. Hit play and test. In the game window, press S to scale the bubble. Okay, once you have a reference to another object, you can dig into its components also. For example, we can get this bubbles material through its mesh renderer and change its color when we press C. Let's open the player controller again and implement this. We'll add some code in the update to check if C is pressed. Inside of our check to see if bubble is not null, we added a new conditional. In this case, we check if the keyboard current.c key is pressed. And if it is, we access the bubbles mesh renderer component using GetComponent on the bubble. Then we access the material property of the mesh renderer and then the color property of the material in that mesh renderer. And we assign it to a new color, which has 3 random.range calls, producing a decimal number from 0 to 1 on the R, G, and B, or red, green, and blue components of the color. And we assign that back to the color slot. Let's see that in action. Save your script and go back to Unity. Let's hit play to test. We'll hit C. You can see a new color is assigned every time I hit C. We'll hit S. Scaling still works. And spacebar. Our player still moves up with rigid body. All right, you just learned how to connect your components to other game objects and components. That's a huge step forward. It's the glue that connects everything together and makes gameplay possible. If you found this helpful, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. And keep experimenting connecting your objects together. The more you practice this, the more natural it'll feel. And if there's anything I missed or was confusing, let me know in the comments so that I can help make things clearer the next time. I've put together a free Unity project you can download right now. It's a complete coin collector game. You move a player around, you collect coins, and you keep score. It's the perfect starting point if you want to see how Unity scripts, collisions, and game logic all come together. And if you want a step-by-step path to learning Unity, check out my Unity 101 Bootcamp course. The link is in the description below. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.